You're tuning in because you're trying to get a handle on some pretty interesting legal news that's been developing, right? We're going to take a close look at these recent decisions by federal judges in Texas and New York, too.
That's right.
They've temporarily blocked the deportation of certain Venezuelan migrants.
Exactly. And what makes this really stand out, right from the start is the context. The Trump administration had been moving to deport these individuals
Okay.
using a really old law, the Alien Enemies Act.
Right, I saw that mentioned.
And this was even after the Supreme Court had basically given the green light for these deportations to proceed.
So the highest court said, okay, but then these blocks happened.
Precisely. So these temporary blocks are definitely throwing a bit of a wrench in those plans, at least for now.
Okay, so let's try to, unpack this, understand the nuts and bolts of these orders. We saw action in two different states, you said, Texas and New York. What exactly did the judges order?
Right. So starting down in Texas, there's U.S. District Judge Fernando Rodriguez Jr. He's actually a Trump appointee.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And he issued what's called a temporary restraining order, a TRO.
Which is basically a pause button, legally speaking.
Essentially, yes. It puts a pause on something specific. In this case, it stops the removal, the deportation of certain migrants, specifically those who fall under President Trump's proclamation related to this Alien Enemies Act.
And this applies to migrants in a particular place?
Yes, from a detention facility there in Texas.
Gotcha. And you mentioned temporary. This isn't a permanent stop, is it? What's the time frame look like?
Good point. No, definitely temporary. The order right now is in place until April 23rd. But there's a hearing scheduled. Judge Rodriguez set it for this Friday, and it'll be via video conference.
Ah, okay. So that hearing could change things.
Absolutely. What happens there could determine if this block continues or if it gets lifted.
Yeah.
So definitely something to watch.
Okay, so temporary pause in Texas, key hearing coming up Friday.
Got it. Now, what about New York? Was that a similar kind of thing, or did it happen differently?
Similar outcome, yes, a temporary block. But it came about slightly differently. In New York, it was attorneys representing two Venezuelan men.
Okay.
These men are being held in detention up in Orange County, New York. Their lawyers went to court.
What were they asking for?
They argued to prevent their clients from being deported or even moved outside of New York State or the U.S. while the case proceeds.
And they were successful, temporarily at least.
Yes. U.S. District Judge Alvin Hellerstein granted that temporary block on Tuesday.
And Judge Hellerstein, was he appointed by?
He was appointed by President Bill Clinton.
Okay. So a Clinton appointee in New York, a Trump appointee in Texas, both issuing blocks.
Within a very short time frame, yeah. Federal judges in two separate states taking action to halt these specific deportations, short-term halt. Okay, so we've got these immediate actions, these temporary holds in Texas and New York. Now, this Alien Enemies Act keeps popping up. It sounds old, like something from a history textbook.
You're absolutely right. It does sound historical, because it is. The Alien Enemies Act is fundamentally, it's a law tied to wartime.
Wartime.
Yeah, it gives the executive branch, the president, specific powers over non-citizens who are from countries the U.S. is actually at war with, or, in case of an invasion.
But we aren't formally at war with Venezuela.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's what makes this so, legally interesting and controversial. The Trump administration is reaching back to this wartime legislation for a situation that doesn't fit that traditional declared war definition.
So that's the part that makes you pause. Using a law designed for wartime conflict in this context, so the administration's argument must be that this situation with these specific migrants justifies it somehow.
That seems to be the core of their legal reasoning, yes. They're focusing on allegations against some of these individuals claiming ties to the Tren de Aragua gang.
Ah, right. That gang has been mentioned in reports.
Yes. And the administration is likely arguing that the alleged threat posed by this group is serious enough to trigger powers under the Alien Enemies Act, even without a formal war declaration.
Okay, let me see if I have the sequence right. The Trump administration invokes this old wartime law.
Yeah.
The Supreme Court basically says, okay, you can proceed with deportations under this law for now.
Right. They cleared the path, didn't block it at that stage.
And then, boom, these two federal district judges, one in Texas, one in New York, step in and say, hold on a minute.
You got it. That's the sequence.
It really paints a picture of the legal system in motion, doesn't it? Different levels interacting.
It really does. It's a perfect illustration of that dynamic interplay.
Hmm.
between the different branches of government and even within the judicial system.
Executive branch.
Supreme Court offers guidance, or at least doesn't intervene initially.
And then the district courts provide another layer. Scrutiny, maybe checks and balances.
Exactly. Checks and balances in action, potentially.
Now, for listeners trying to keep track, who are the main players we should be aware of as the story continues to unfold? It's more than just the judges, right?
Oh, absolutely. You've got the Trump administration, obviously. Specifically, the Department of Justice is likely handling the legal side of these deportation efforts.
Okay, DOJ.
Then, of course, the Venezuelan migrants themselves, particularly those the government alleges are associated with the Tren de Aragua gang.
Right. And the judges we've discussed.
Yes, Judge Rodriguez in Texas and Judge Hellerstein in New York, they're central to this immediate phase, issuing these temporary blocks.
And it's probably worth just reiterating that the connection to this gang, Tren de Aragua, these are allegations being made by the government, right? The legal issue here is more about the authority to deport using this specific act.
Precisely. That's a crucial distinction. The core legal questions are about whether the Alien Enemies Act is being applied correctly here, and also, whether the due process rights of these individuals are being protected as things move forward.
Now, something you mentioned earlier jumped out at me. The judges. One appointed by a Republican president, Trump, the other by a Democratic president, Clinton. Does that tell us anything? Should we read much into that?
Well, it's definitely noteworthy. I mean, it suggests that the legal concerns prompting these temporary blocks might not be simple partisan ones. The fact that judges appointed by presidents from different parties both found enough reason to hit pause, at least for now, it hints that maybe there are more fundamental legal questions about using this act this way, questions that transcend politics.
So it might be less about political alignment and more about, say, judicial interpretation of this specific old law.
It could certainly point in that direction. It seems to be a more nuanced situation. These judges, perhaps with different judicial philosophies, they've both looked at the arguments and said, okay, hold on, let's examine this more closely before deportations happen. Hence, the temporary halt.
And the key word there, again, that was stressed in the reporting, is temporary.
Crucial. Absolutely crucial.
These aren't final decisions. This isn't the end of the legal road here.
Not by a long shot. Like we said, that hearing in Texas on Friday, that's a big next step. We'll likely get a clearer idea then if Judge Rodriguez extends the order, modifies it, or lets it expire.
And the New York case will continue on its own track too, presumably.
Yes, these things take time to work through the courts.
It really does shine a light on how our legal system is meant to work, doesn't it? Even if it seems complex sometimes. You have these different branches, different court levels interacting, sometimes agreeing, sometimes like here, prompting a second look.
Yeah, if you kind of zoom out, look at the bigger picture. What's fascinating is how it underscores those checks and balances we talked about. Even when the Supreme Court allows something, individual district judges still have the power to say, wait, are we sure about this? If they see valid legal questions.
Raises questions about executive power, too.
Yeah, definitely. Especially when it involves using, historical wartime laws in situations today that aren't quite war. It forces a discussion about the scope of that power.
So for you, the listener, this isn't just some abstract legal thing. It's a real-world example of how legal interpretations affect actual people.
Absolutely.
And it brings up these big questions about government power and how old laws fit into modern problems.
Exactly right. And these temporary blocks, they create a really important space, a window for the arguments on behalf of these individuals to get a thorough hearing in court. The human element is right there.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this up for now. The main takeaway seems to be federal judges, Texas and New York, have temporarily paused some specific deportations. Deportations pursued under the Alien Enemies Act, even after the Supreme Court didn't initially stop them.
That's a great summary. And it's very much a developing situation. More legal steps are coming soon.
Right, so things could change.
Definitely. For anyone wanting to stay on top of this, following reliable news outlets for updates, especially after that Texas hearing on Friday, is the way to go.
And it really leaves you thinking, doesn't it? What does it truly mean to invoke a wartime law, the Alien Enemies Act, in this specific context today? And what might the longer-term ripples be, not just for these migrants, but for how this law could be used or challenged in the future? Definitely some food for thought there. Thanks for helping us unpack all this.
My pleasure. It's certainly a situation worth watching.